Das ist mein Gotteswillen!
The Führer couldn't have said it better himself.
What is going on, my beautiful viewers? I am back again today to do another episode breakdown of Overlord Season 1. So yeah, it's been a little bit over a week. I've been trying to put out a video at least once a week for the past little pace. I made a post about this already, but I recently just purchased, you can see the seat right there, I recently purchased a new drum kit. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you know I used to do anime drum covers on this channel. Unfortunately, I had to sell that kit a couple years ago, and I haven't had a chance to get back in the saddle for a while. Finally decided to pull the trigger, bought myself a Roland kit. I am having so much fun with it, and that's really what's been the time sink lately. I've just been setting up and playing with it and then like figuring out how electronic kits works. I've never owned or played an electronic kit before. I'll be getting back into anime drum covers on this channel. It is something I want to get back into. But with the excuses out of the way, today we're going to be covering episode 11 of season 1. Once again, just like last time's episode, this episode covered a lot, like over 100 pages. It's not based on what the anime showed just by itself, but because the anime omitted a couple of decent sized scenes. So this one's going to be a big one because I have to explain these scenes from scratch because they completely omitted things as opposed to just changing them like they do for a lot of episodes. So starting off, this actually takes place before Ainz has his meeting with Albedo in Nazarick right after he finds out about Shaltir. So I should say they didn't completely remove the intermission from Volume 3, they actually moved it to season 2. I don't know why they did that. It is kind of like a completely out of context thing, so it really could be placed anywhere. The actual first scene of season 2 with Ramposa and Gazef is actually the intermission for volume 3. So it takes place much sooner in the light novel than it does in the anime. The intermission is also much longer. They pretty much like chopped it in half in the anime. So the actual first part of the intermission that isn't shown in the anime is the king meeting with a bunch of his nobles. This is where we start to learn a lot about the nobility and the factionalism in the Riesti's government. I go into detail about that in my Riesti's Explained video. This is where we get really like our first in-depth glimpse because the whole scene is told from the perspective of Gazef and he's in this meeting. And we also get Gazef's perspective on it as a person who was raised up because Gazef is a commoner. In this scene, Gazef explains like a lot of things about how like even though the nobles will let him speak, sometimes, obviously Gazef is the most physically powerful man in the kingdom. They just don't like being inferior to a commoner in anything. But basically the treatment of Gazef in this scene ranges from begrudging acceptance to downright hostility, like just because he's a commoner. And this just goes to show you the corrupt system that the Riesti's government has struggled with. Another thing is that for the first time in the series, Marquis Raven is introduced, which he becomes a major player in the later seasons of the Overlord anime, but as opposed to the anime where he's introduced for the first time in season 2, he's actually introduced in volume 3, the season 1 content here. And I also think the anime didn't really present Marquis Raven like correctly, maybe not incorrectly, but they didn't explain really what his position is. Gazef explains in the light novel that Marquis Raven he's got pull with both of the factions. He's got pull with the royal faction and the noble faction, and he's also the most powerful noble in the country. Basically, Marquis Raven is a man that no one wants to be enemies with because he's so powerful and he has so much influence. He's like one of the only people in the kingdom that like can do things like mostly unopposed. Like not even the king can do that. Like Marquis Raven debatably has more influence than the king does, especially because Ramposa is old and in the basically tradition of Riestes, he would have abdicated by now. And then it continues on with that scene that we see in season 2 of the anime with Renaer and Klein being introduced. But once again, it's just these characters are just introduced earlier, I guess, in the light novel than they are in the anime. Not too much to add on this scene. It pretty much plays out exactly the same. One thing I did want to mention, I don't think they ever say it in the anime, but Ramposa has other daughters besides Renaer. Once Klein and Renaer kind of run off, Ramposa has this kind of thought about like, oh, I'd like to let at least like one of my daughters like kind of do what she wants, because it's very obvious that Klein likes Renaer and Renaer likes Klein, but like obviously because of their social standings they can't like be publicly together like that. But Ramposa loves Renaer a lot and kind of wants to let her, you know, do whatever she wants, but because of the political situation it's tough for him to like justify that. And also he said my other daughters would not like it if I let Renaer do whatever she wanted because the other daughters married for political reasons. Just a little more insight into the mind of Ramposa. So a quick plug here, guys. Apparently YouTube helps out if I say this earlier on in the video, but apparently almost 70% of our viewers are not subscribed. It would really help me out if you guys subscribed. I would love to get that number up. We're getting closer to 40,000. It's a milestone I really want to hit, so if you could please help me out, that'd be awesome. And of course, guys, if you want to see more Overlord videos, please like the video. That lets me know that these videos are popular and they're wanted, and it motivates me to keep putting them out. All right, with that plug out of the way, let's continue on with the breakdown. So then moving on, we have another completely cut scene. Like, literally, they just, the beginning of this episode, just imagine a giant chunk of information was just removed. So the episode of the anime opens up with Ainz just seeing Shoutier through like a little monitor or whatever. In the light novel, they actually go see Negredo. Now, if you watched it all the way to season 4, you'd know who Negredo is. Negredo is Albedo's sister, and she is in the frozen prison area of floor 5. She's an area guardian. She is not introduced until season 4, volume 14 content. So her introduction is literally 11 volumes earlier in the light novel than it is in the anime. It's a pretty massive distinction here. So they go to the frozen prison, and during this scene, we kind of get a couple of tidbits of information from Ainz's inner dialogue. One of them is that this is where the Sunlit Scripture members are being kept with Neuronus, and another is he starts to realize that the NPCs have basically started to fill in their personalities by who their creators are. Because when their personalities were designed in Yggdrasil, it's not like they filled in every single little thing. They're basically filling in those gaps with qualities of their creators, because it seems like all the NPCs start to act a little bit like their creators when they have to do something that wasn't dictated in their personality scripts, I guess. So they go on and they enter Negredo's room, and when they enter, the light novel describes it as basically they hear like 100 babies crying all at once. So they open the door, they hear the babies, and then Negredo is standing there in the room, and she has a doll in a cradle and she's rocking it. She basically says, "This is not my baby," and then attacks Ainz and Albedo. They had another doll ready, and Ainz is just like, "Here's your baby," and then Negredo immediately just like completely calms down and is not hostile anymore. It's like an event, and apparently Tabula designed it because he just wanted like a horror thing, and like Negredo was designed with like horror in mind, and that kind of goes to her pretty grotesque appearance, like with the no skin on her face kind of thing. But that's like her whole event, is you have to give her the baby doll in order for her to calm down. Otherwise she's like openly hostile to anyone that approaches the frozen prison. So this is where Ainz then asks Negredo for her assistance in tracking down Shoutier, because Negredo is a magic caster and she's specialized in investigation and, you know, information gathering magic. We also get a couple of interactions between Albedo and Negredo, which we never get in the anime. We see in this scene that Negredo and Albedo like each other and they seem to get along. However, once Ainz leaves to go talk to the guild members, Negredo and Albedo talk about their youngest sister, Rubedo. I've mentioned Rubedo in a Q&A before, but basically Rubedo is like the strongest NPC period in Nazarick, and out of the trio of sisters, she's the youngest. Now, Albedo views Rubedo as a darling little sister, like a cute little sister kind of thing. But Negredo fears and does not like Rubedo. She nicknamed her in the light novel Spinel, and I think they made some jokes about her being mechanical, because I think she's some sort of automaton or something. There's been a few references to that. We never see Rubedo in the light novel or anime like verbatim, so like it's kind of a guess on her appearance. So now we move on to Ainz's meeting with the Mithril rank adventurers along with the guild leader Einzak. One thing I noticed in the anime is that there are 2 characters that are present in this meeting in the light novel that are omitted in the anime. One is the mayor of Irantel, and the other is the head of the Magicians Guild in Irantel as well. The conversation is also longer. There's a whole scene before the actual discussion about the vampire starts where Ivar, the kind of antagonistic adventurer, keeps questioning Momon's abilities and like how he was promoted to Mithril. There's also a scene where Ainz removes his helmet and shows his fake face to them. Basically, it's just showing that Ivar is this guy that is just openly hostile towards Ainz, and everyone is getting annoyed with him as well because he keeps derailing the conversation to talk shit about Ainz. Overall, the scene is relatively the same, but I did want to add one point about why Ainz came up with the name Honyo Pinyoko for the vampire. So originally he was going to say in a standard vampire name, which he was going to say Camilla as a standard vampire name, but he realized that might be pointed out if there were other players around, so he didn't want to do that. So he just randomly came up with Honyo Pinyoko as a name because he wanted it to be like non-standard for people from Earth. Another thing that is added on is when Ainz pulls out his crystal and he says there's 8th tier magic in it. This is where the head of the Magicians Guild comes in, and so he sees this crystal and he just completely loses his mind over it. He like freaks out. He's like touching it, and he even licks it and rubs it against his face. He goes completely batshit over this crystal. And in the anime, they say, Ein says, we could get it appraised, but I don't have time for that. In the light novel, he does actually appraise it, the Magician's Guild guy, and he confirms there's 8th tier magic in it, and that is completely unbelievable to everyone there. I feel like I should explain this. There are certain people in the New World that do know about the higher tiers of magic and super tier magic and things like that, but it's not common knowledge in the New World, so that's why they're all like, oh, the 8th tier is just a myth. Basically, Ein's pulling out this crystal and then confirming that it's 8th tier. We get the perspective from the Magician's Guild where he's just like, oh, maybe the legends that I heard about growing up are true. Like, I gotta go back to the sagas and read these things. Basically, Ein's casually pulling out this crystal with 8th tier magic, which is god level to these people, is just completely reshaping the world. Once again, Ein's casually blowing up preconceived notions of people in the New World. So at this point, the anime jumps ahead to the scene with Ivar being killed by Mare. Like in the anime, it just cuts and Ivar's already trapped, whereas in the light novel, we see the build up to this, and they're basically, they all ride there together with Hamsky, and then Albedo shows up and calls him Lord Ainz, and everyone's like, what, Lord Ainz? And then that's when Ainz reveals to himself, like, yeah, my name's not Momon, it's Ainz, but whatever, because you guys are gonna be dead shortly thereafter. So Igvarg runs off into the forest and leaves his teammates behind, and this part of the story is from Igvarg's point of view, and we hear a little bit about his backstory, about how he has struggled his whole life to claw his way up to Mithril, and his goal is to enter the realm of heroes and everything like that. And he's kind of a despicable guy, because he says he doesn't care to leave his teammates behind. They're just stepping stones for him to become great. And then he runs into Mare, who traps him with the magic and then bludgeons him to death. Like I said, just a little bit longer, but they basically trimmed the fat in this scene. So then Albedo and Ainz go to Shaltir, and there's a small conversation where Ainz talks about why he hasn't done any resurrection experiments. And I'll just go ahead and read straight from the light novel to describe the Yggdrasil mechanic of resurrection. In Yggdrasil, there were 4 outcomes when casting resurrection magic on someone, which also dealt the penalty of lost XP. The first was that they would revive on the spot. The second was that they would revive at the entrance to the dungeon or wherever. The third was that they would revive in a safe town nearby. And the fourth was that they would revive at their designated home point, such as their guild's headquarters. So what would happen when resurrection magic was cast in this world? It goes without saying that Ainz was most worried about the 4th version and home point revival. So basically, Ainz never conducted resurrection experiments on the Sunlit Scripture members and Negan after he died in his interrogation, because he was worried about the fact that if he revived him, he might get teleported home to the Slain Theocracy, and then they would have all this information about Ainz because he revealed himself. That's why he's been hesitant to use resurrection in the New World. So then we get to the scene where Ainz tries to use Wish Upon a Star to cure Shaltir. The one thing I want to point out in this scene is that we get a lot more information on the spell Wish Upon a Star. So Ainz in the light novel describes the ring as his strongest ring, and it's a super, super rare item. How it worked in Yggdrasil was that the actual spell Wish Upon a Star, basically what wish would be granted would be random. You would activate the spell and it would grant you a random wish, and there were tons of different effects. I think there were over 200 different wishes that could be granted at random. There were a couple of really good ones, and the more powerful ones were less likely, but there were also some ones that were completely useless, but they were less likely to appear as well. When Ainz uses his ring in the light novel, he has this kind of information just rushed into his head, and it reveals to him that Wish Upon a Star works differently in the New World than it did in Yggdrasil. So once again, I'll just read the passage directly from the light novel here because it explains it better than I could. Ainz realized that Wish Upon a Star in this world was something totally different from what it had been in Yggdrasil. When he'd learned of Enfyria's talent, he had fantasized that maybe he could steal it using Wish Upon a Star, and it turned out that was not off the mark. Wish Upon a Star had changed into a spell that could grant his wish. It did depend on how many experience points he spent, but it was a spell that could make the impossible possible. It had also transformed in this world so that by sacrificing 5 levels, it could grant more powerful wishes. The spell has changed in the New World to where he can now grant crazy powerful things, and it's also specific to what he wants, as opposed to a random effect. So the spell is now completely broken. It is very, very powerful at this point. It's basically leveled up. in the new world, thanks to just the mechanics being different. But of course it fails, and this is when Ainz learns that the effect that Shalltear was cast upon with came from a world item. So then we shift scenes to the Treasury in Ainz Ul Gone. This is kind of the last scene of the episode. So in the anime, he brings Yuri Alpha and Albedo with him, but in the light novel, he also brings CZ Delta, or Shizu for short. I've mentioned Shizu in my Holy Kingdom breakdown videos because she becomes a major character there, but once again, a character that is introduced later on in the anime, but much earlier in the light novel. It's just there's a lot of introductions in the first season of Overlord that just didn't happen. So the reason he brings Shizu, that he explains in the light novel, is that he goes to the Treasury and the door has the password and everything. Ainz doesn't remember the password. He can't remember what to say to get in. And the reason he brought Shizu is because she was designed to have all that information like stored with her. Like, so she knows like how all the intricacies and gimmicks kind of work in Nazarick. He's able to figure it out himself, but he brought her along as kind of like, oh, if I don't know, Shizu will know, so I want to bring her with me. And so then we get into the introduction of one of my favorite characters in the series, Pandora's actor. So this scene is mostly the same. It's a little less, honestly, it's a little less dramatic in the light novel. I kind of liked the way the anime really upped the ham of Pandora's actor. They describe it in the light novel, but it just doesn't hit the same way that the visuals and the music and the voices do. But one thing I wanted to add is that Ainz talks about his outfit a little bit more in the light novel, and that gives us a little information about the real world that Suzuki Satoru comes from. So the way Ainz describes it is that Pandora's actor's outfit is modeled based on the neo-Nazi SS. So something I should explain is that a lot of the structure of like the world that Suzuki Satoru comes from is based around mega cities. They're like these massive domed environments that people live in because of the pollution that is present in Earth now. And there was a war in Europe about 20 years ago in Suzuki Satoru's timeline. And it was a war between the European cities, the mega cities. And that's when these neo-Nazi SS guys like showed up and became prominent apparently. And so Ainz modeled Pandora's actor, his outfit, after their outfits that they wore in real life. Interesting little history tidbit about Earth of 2138, which we don't get a whole lot of. So I really like to focus in on those things. But this scene is just funny and it's even funnier in the light novel because we get more of Ainz's like internal dialogue and cringe about Pandora's actors and just like how like what was I thinking when I designed this guy, and like yeah, I wanted him to be an actor, so I made him act theatrically, but like I didn't plan on this happening. And then we have that final scene between Albedo and Ainz in the mausoleum, which is basically the same. There's a couple of other tidbits of information we get in this scene, such that Ainz Ul Gone only has 11 world items, and also we get an explanation on the 1 of 20, the 20 world items of like the crazy game-breaking world items of Yggdrasil. One he describes that I remember is this one called Longinus, and basically how it works is it destroys the user as well, but it basically completely destroys the data of someone else. Once again, I'm just going to read directly from the light novel here. One of the most famous of the 20 was Longinus, which if activated would completely delete the target but came with the price of wiping the user as well. Data deleted by Longinus was impossible to recover except via some other world item. No microtransactions or resurrection magic would cover it. So basically, if someone used Longinus to kill you, it was impossible to get you back. Like that, you were just completely erased. No resurrection, nothing happened unless you used another world item with some sort of revival thing. You were done. And according to Pandora's actor, Ainz has 2 of those like 1 of 20 kind of world items, those overpowered ones, but he's very hesitant to use them because of their one-use stipulation. And then we have him declaring that he will fight Shalltear alone, and that ends the episode. The scenes that were present in this episode were mostly faithful. The big points of focus as far as like cut content are just the scenes, like, and how they've chopped them in half or just completely omitted a couple of scenes. Some of these are pretty minor, like CZ's involvement in the Treasury thing is pretty minor. You know, it's interesting because we get introduced to more NPCs, and the NPCs are like really awesome to learn about and, you know, see in the anime, so it is kind of a shame when they're omitted from the anime. And so guys, next time we are going to be covering the last bit of the Bloody Valkyrie. I was debating I might cover both episodes at once because it is the one battle. Also, I guess they really stretched out the battle in the anime because the amount of light novel content that's left in the book itself is about the same as these last 2 episodes I've covered. So basically the last 2 episodes that I've covered have each covered about the same amount of pages that the next 2 episodes will cover. So it's about double the amount of pages. So I was thinking I might just go ahead and cover the last 2 episodes in one sitting. So I will see how that works out. As always, guys, like, subscribe, all that jazz. You know I love to see it. With that being said, I want to thank you all for watching to the very end of the video, and I will see you all next time. Bye.